My name's Kathy Sherrington. I'm delighted to be hosting this meeting tonight. And so we're having a series of events to celebrate 25 years of PEDro, the Physiotherapy Evidence Database. So we had a hybrid event in Australia. We've had an online event in the European time zone. And this event we're focusing on the African time zone. And so I'd first just like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this meeting on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we all work and meet today, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be participating in the meeting. And we pay our respects to elders past and present, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people. All right, so yes, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. This meeting, we don't have a massive number of people, so we're thinking we'd have it a little bit discussion based. But we wanted to, first of all, present some information, have a few different talks. We were actually hoping that Geraldine would chair tonight. So Geraldine's the manager of PEDro at the moment, based at the Institute for Musculoskeletal Health, where I'm based as well at the University of Sydney. Unfortunately, Geraldine's sound isn't working. So she's here. We're saying it's like she's got a sore throat. She's here, but she can't actually talk. So yes, she's waving. So in terms of some housekeeping, which we might not need to worry about too much with being quite a small group. So if you wanted to turn on live captions, that's an option. Keeping our microphones muted. We can use the chat for any comments. Contact Geraldine for any issues, and that we are recording this session, I believe. And then we will finish up sort of on the next hour. And basically what we're planning to do is have a further welcome from Rick Dawson, who's Dr. Rick Dawson, the incoming president of the Australian Physiotherapy Association. We're hearing a little bit from Associate Professor Corlia Brad, who we're delighted is joining us. And then we've got some videos to show on overviewing PEDro, a bit on the history of PEDro. We're going to play another video on some of the PEDro resources. We're going to hear from Associate Professor Mark Elkins on some of the research on PEDro. And then we've got some other input, or we might have a Slido, a kind of quiz. And then we've got some more information about PEDro raters and also the use of PEDro. And then we're really keen to have a bit of a discussion with anyone who's made it along today. So yeah, that's our plan for the next little while. So first I'll hand over to Dr. Rick Dawson to talk from the perspective of the Australian Physio Association. Over to you, Rick.
Just double checking if the screen's progressing.
We're on your
Yes.
first slide with your picture. Yep.
Yes, it's not.
That's it. That's progressing now. Yep, and it is the correct view.
Oh, excellent. Thanks for having me. It's great to be able to have an opportunity to talk to physiotherapists from the African region. And on behalf of the Australian Physio Association, we just want to say thank you to PEDro for creating opportunities for physios to stay up to date. We've been a proud supporter of PEDro since it started 25 years ago, and one of the principal funders. One of the big projects that we've been working on for the last close to 20 years is developing our specialisation pathway, where we support physiotherapists to graduate from university and embark on a process of specialisation. We have supported PEDro to develop some courses to aid physiotherapists on their path to specialisation, in particular into milestone 3, which is the highly developed, which is about the 5 to 10 year out stage, which we call an APA titled physiotherapist. So for myself, I'm a APA titled gerontological physiotherapist. And the course that we've built into their pathway is a series of short online lectures and resources on teaching physios how to identify what is quality research and how to use it for clinical decision making. And we believe that PEDro has been really an important resource to support physiotherapists on their journey to specialisation. Like a lot of physios, we at the APA use PEDro to support the build of our advocacy assets. What we want to do in Australia, unlike I'm sure everybody out there in physio land, we want to influence government to support the development of our profession, to expand our scope and to deliver a career pathway and opportunities from a funding point of view for us to be able to deliver the best sort of treatments to our patients. So we've used PEDro to develop a number of what we call our advocacy assets. In particular, a few years ago, we released a piece called the Economic Value Proposition of Physiotherapy, where we looked at 13 different conditions, such as low back pain, neck pain, Parkinson's, falls, tennis elbow, incontinence, just to show the government how important physio is in improving the efficiency of the healthcare system. So PEDro, congratulations, 25 years, you've done an amazing job, and we've really valued being able to be a supporter and helping you expand your impact over the last 25 years. And we look forward to being a proud partner for the next 25 years. So I look forward to the rest of the talk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rick. That's really helpful, and such a great overview of the contribution of the APA to PEDro since the beginning, as well as the role and the usefulness of PEDro for physiotherapy associations. And so next, we're delighted to pass over to Professor Corlia Brandt from the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, who's the Professional Development Portfolio lead of the from this Professional Development Portfolio of the South African Society of Physiotherapy National Executive Committee. So yes, look forward to hearing what you've got to say, Corlia.
Thank you very much also for the invitation to briefly just speak to you. So it was interesting to listen to the previous couple of points, and I think there's so much overlap between societies as well. I just want to start with a little bit of a personal history, which I actually realized when I saw, PEDro is actually 25 years old, if I can put it that way. So my first personal interaction with PEDro was actually when I did my master's degree back in 2000, and I did a systematic review. And in those days, we didn't have the fancy things like JBI and all the software helping us to do the systematic review. So it was a manual task. And I remember that I actually used the PEDro rating scale, as one of the scales to appraise the quality of the evidence. And, I didn't realize PEDro was actually then quite new, obviously, at that stage. And then, of course, in the university environment, we deal a lot with students doing research, specifically master students that do a lot of reviews, always going to PEDro as a database to search there. And then also in the South African Society of Physiotherapy, specifically in my portfolio. So we look a lot into the quality of the profession and the evidence and anything that we do. So, for example, we have the National Physiotherapy Educators Forum under us, where we look into training. We also are looking into specialization at the moment, and looking for different pathways to which we can get there. And then also we have, we are busy in South Africa with the national health insurance that is developing, and we need a lot of evidence to kind of, to support the place of us physios, specifically in the health system and in the rehabilitation aspect specifically as well. Then we also have the South African Journal of Physiotherapy, which we subsidize. And obviously then PEDro plays a very important role there as well, specifically for our physios who are not in the academic environment, because they don't always have that ease of access to journals, and open access articles. So they use a lot the PEDro database as well to help them with the evidence. And then also, we are starting to looking into, for example, AI, specifically developing it for our profession as well, specifically related to the South African context. And then also medical aids. We need to produce a lot of evidence statements many times to support, billing and tariffs and coding and things like that. So definitely, without PEDro, we would struggle a bit in some instances, for sure. And then, I started talking to Geraldine a couple of weeks ago, actually, after an email that she sent us. And I think we really can explore this, interaction and relationship with PEDro a bit further. And I would really like, we would look forward to further collaborate, interact, explore any possibilities there are. I think we are just touching basically on the basics of PEDro, when we use it for our purposes of evidence. Specifically in this area of, evidence-based practice, we can't really do anything without supplying the evidence. I think PEDro has really supported us quite a lot. So thank you very much to PEDro for their support. And we really appreciate it. And I hope we engage a bit more in the future as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claudia. And I think that's fascinating. That issue came up in the European focused webinar as well. The idea of people kind of growing up with PEDro. We had someone there who talked about using it at the beginning of his academic career as well. So yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you so much. So next we'll play a little bit of a video which overviews the current status of PEDro. Let's hope technology's our friend.
So I'm an avid PEDro user. So I've used PEDro as a clinician, but also as an academic and as a researcher. So I think PEDro is important because I think it helps me to locate the high quality evidence in a shorter time. Then that would of course influence what I teach and also influence the treatments that are being delivered.
Community is really important, and physiotherapists form a great community. So I'm sure many people will kind of get it when I say you always know somebody somewhere. So we have a great community of practitioners, and I think that's the first thing I like about PEDro. It's focused in to our community, and it's selecting evidence that's appropriate to our community.
We're awash with all kinds of dodgy journals out there. So to have a trusted resource to go to where you can reliably access knowledge around what is the evidence, what is reliable evidence for this condition, I think is absolutely critical. But actually to have an independent body that's not got vested interest to say, hey, what is the evidence for this? That's so important for us as a profession, and for clinicians to go, I can trust this as a source of reliable, accurate knowledge.
We've got another video which does have some embarrassing photos in it. It gives a bit of a history of PEDro and has some of the other founders interviewed as well.
At one stage in the School of Physiotherapy at the University of Sydney, lecturers were given the opportunity to run elective subjects, and I ran one on using clinical trials to make clinical decisions. The assignment for it required that students go and find 3 clinical trials on a question of their interest and critically appraise them. So over the period of several years, I accrued several hundred randomised trials. So I remember talking to Kathy about it, and we thought, oh, this is a pretty valuable resource. We could do something with this, and we put our heads together and we decided that there's this new thing called the internet, and we might put it on the internet, and we put it on a PC in the lab and got PEDro up and running.
I think I realised when I travelled, because I could be in places in South America and people wouldn't know who I was. But once you mentioned PEDro, their eyes would light up and things would warm. And so, yeah, I guess I realised at that point in time, we'd created something which had global recognition, which is pretty extraordinary. And so that was probably within 5 or so years of developing PEDro. So it's amazing that you could reach all these different parts of the world so quickly.
I really realised we were onto a good thing when 2 organisations really helped us, the Australian Physiotherapy Association and also the Motor Accidents Authority of New South Wales. And they provided seed funding for us to get started, which was really pivotal. But more importantly, they provided some recurrent funding, and the Australian Physiotherapy Association is still an important funder of PEDro. And it was their vision for wanting to improve patient outcomes and not having to get something out of it, like it was the philanthropic doing something good for physiotherapy in New South Wales, Australia and the world, that they really invested in it.
I think for me, the most mind-blowing thing was when Anne started working out how to actually record the statistics from the website. And then we really realised, how many countries around the world were actually using PEDro and the absolute number of users.
We started off having 50 concurrent users, and so now there's a new search initiated every 10 seconds, and it's used across the globe. So, for example, in countries that are experiencing quite a lot of hardship at the moment, like the Ukraine, physiotherapists are still using PEDro to guide practice. And so hopefully we're influencing the quality of care in countries that are really struggling because of other issues.
Many physiotherapists won't realise that as recently as the 1990s, really there was very little research going on in physiotherapy. And I think PEDro had a role in turning that around and making people look specifically at evidence of the effectiveness of interventions rather than just at the mechanisms or hypothesised mechanisms behind things.
My proudest moment with PEDro was when I was awarded the Mildred Elson Award by the then World Confederation for Physical Therapy in 2019. And I received the award because of my contribution to physiotherapy because of PEDro. And I feel like I was hogging the limelight there because the real star of the show was PEDro. PEDro winning this amazing, prestigious award was a great validation of the importance of PEDro globally.
To me, another factor in the kind of global engagement is the number of different languages that the website has been translated into. And that's, again, Anne's hard work with making connections from people all around the world to, volunteer to actually translate elements of the website.
Yeah, and for us, that's an international expression of people's goodwill and their enthusiasm and altruism.
I think, to me, the most amazing feedback has been when we've attended the World Physiotherapy Congresses, and we hold stalls on PEDro at those congresses, and the number of people who genuinely come up from countries all around the world and talk about how they've contributed to PEDro or how they're using PEDro, and how PEDro makes a difference in their practice is quite mind-blowing.
Well, the challenge is that we've got an exponential growth in research, which in one way is good, but it then makes the cost of running PEDro quite high and growing exponentially each year, which you would understand. And so I think that is the challenge. You have to look to technology to provide the solution to that challenge. Obviously we can't turn off research. That'd be a pretty silly way to solve the problem. So really we've got to get a technological solution so that we can archive and synthesize and make available the evidence. And so it's on that side of the equation that we need to get something happening.
Yeah, so thanks for watching that. Any questions, comments?
I just wanted to say that I've seen it 3 times now, but this is the video I love most. I really enjoy seeing the history of PEDro and also seeing those photos of you guys like way, way back. I love it.
Thank you so much, Kim. Glad to be providing entertainment, but also inspiration. So that's great. Thank you. We next have a video from Chia, one of our committee members, that shares some of the other resources that are available on PEDro.
So today I'll talk a little bit about the resource that PEDro has been developed over the last 25 years. And I thought it would be nice to start talking a little bit about the physiotherapy as a profession. And so we all know the challenge that we face to implement evidence-based practice, but we also know that the patient outcome and the success of an intervention really depends on that. So aiming to inform physiotherapy practice, PEDro has lots of different resources that are very important and very interesting. So for today's presentation, I decided to share some key milestones with you, but of course, PEDro offers much more, and you can always check on the website. So the first one that I would like to talk is a little bit about the database itself. The database is really the backbone of PEDro, and it's like the library for evidence, physiotherapy evidence. At the beginning was just a pile of printed articles, as Rob said, but today we have more than 63,000 trials, systematic reviews, and guidelines. And PEDro reach is huge in terms of how it has been used over the globe. And so PEDro is assessed for more than 215 countries with more than 10,000 daily searches, and as Anne said, with one search every 7 or 10 seconds. The second milestone that I would say is the PEDro scale, which I think is like a report card for research. And if the database is the library, then the PEDro scale is kind of the librarian. So it ensures that you find the best research. And the third milestone that I would say, it's all the training program and all the different campaigns and video tutorials that PEDro provides. But I choose 2 to be mentioned here today. So the first one is the PEDro Tackle Barriers campaign that was created to hear about physios' complaints on how to use evidence-based practice, but also to provide some insights on how to break down those barriers. And the second one is the PEDro training scale, the PEDro scale training, which teaches you how to assess physiotherapy trials for methodological quality. And the last one, but not least, is the Worldwide Journal Club. So the Journal Club was launched in 2020, and it has been a great success, generating discussions around latest research on a certain field. And so key studies addressing gaps in evidence are selected, and then discussion is generating to explore how we can implement those insights to improve care. And so if you're not familiar with that, or if you want to join, you can simply scan the QR code on the screen. And so PEDro has been changing the future of physiotherapy, impacting physiotherapy practice globally. And I just would like to show you some examples of this. I think the first one that we saw before is the internationalization. So today, PEDro speaks 17 languages, and this means that physiotherapists all around the world can find evidence-based resource in their native language. And this may sound a bit trivial, but we should probably remember that language is one of the biggest barriers to access and use evidence-based practice. So I think this is really a huge achievement. The second one is the evidence in your inbox. And so this is probably the easiest way to keep you updated. And PEDro can send you all the new evidence on a specific area of your choice. And the last one, but again, not least, is the newsletter. So the newsletter brings information on the latest development and research. And for those resources, if you are interested to know more about it, or if you want to subscribe, those QR codes can take you to the subscription page. So to finish today, I just would like to say that from those 5 very smart people, I think today we are a huge community. And more than a PEDro collaborator that I realized I've been for 10 years, I'm here today maybe as a Brazilian physiotherapist that recognize how PEDro has changed the profession and the professionals in my country over the last 25 years. So it's just amazing to see how PEDro provides resources that are really vital for better clinical practice. So I just would like to thank you and to ask for us all to continue holding hands and keep PEDro alive.
Let's hand over to Mark now to actually present live some work on the research that's been about PEDro.
Thanks very much, Kathy.
Perfect.
Great. So if you go to the Resources tab on the PEDro homepage, you will find papers published by the PEDro team under these headings. So some discuss how PEDro can help with evidence-based practice. Some others discuss sort of the content of PEDro or usage of PEDro or the PEDro scale. People often like to see how this evidence accumulated over time. So what this moving graph shows is that for about the first decade after PEDro started, there wasn't many papers, mainly on the whole content of PEDro, a couple on core journals and the PEDro scale. And then we really got into looking at the RCTs and the quality of the RCTs. Then we had a few on systematic reviews and data and so on. And so that's kind of where the graph ended up. And so that's kind of how the content is spread out. So what that showed you is that things accumulated very slowly for the first decade or so, and then they sped up. And so what I'd like to do now is feature a few articles from along that pathway. And the first one is the very first paper that was published about PEDro by the founders of the database. And that just described the content of the database. And coincidentally, at that time, the size of PEDro was about 1/25 of what it is now on its 25th birthday. The next paper was one that was written in response to, I guess, criticisms or complaints that when we recommended that people go and engage with the evidence and read trials, people would often say, oh, all the trials show that the treatment is ineffective. And so this paper was to show that in a whole range of subdisciplines of physiotherapy, even back then there was evidence of effective interventions. And we sort of have a similar problem today where people complain when we suggest that they go and look at systematic reviews, that they say, oh, all these systematic reviews are inconclusive, and they all just say more research is needed. But actually over time that the proportion of conclusive reviews is slowly improving. The next paper was this one, which has been cited over 5,000 times, and that's because the PEDro scale has been used for rating the quality of randomized trials, not just in physiotherapy interventions, but in other professions, so speech pathology, medicine, pharmacology, and so on. And the number of reviews that have used the PEDro scale is just continuing to increase exponentially. Then there's a whole series of papers that are kind of like grumpy report cards for the profession, just notifying researchers and authors that the methods or the reporting or the registration of trials is not as good as it could be. Fortunately, when we've come back to look at these same issues again later on in time, we have seen that things have improved over time. So maybe people have gotten the message from these report card papers, from reporting guidelines, and from other sources. One of these report card papers was this one, which was about the use of confidence intervals in reporting between group differences in randomized trials. And this really caught the attention of the physiotherapy journal editors. And so they wrote a joint editorial that was co-published in 15 journals, encouraging people to use confidence intervals. And what we have seen is a steady improvement in the proportion of randomized trials of physiotherapy interventions that use confidence intervals over time. So if you would like to do one of these studies that uses the content of PEDro as its fodder for analysis, then please feel free to email me and we'll send you a template to make sure that you get the data you need out of the database, and that we make sure you get it in a format that you need. So we're very happy to hear from other people who want to do research on the topic of PEDro. And so just let me know if you would like to launch one of those projects. Okay, back to you, Kathy. Thank you.
So then we just had now another video, and this one about the different elements of rating on the PEDro website. And then we'll have some further time for questions and discussion.
The training was great. It was easy to follow. It took me through each of the steps in a time that suited me, and I was able to do it from the comfort of my own home.
It was self-paced, so I could pause and repeat content as much as I liked at any time. There was also support from the PEDro team if I had any queries throughout the training.
I could do it from where I live in rural South Australia, I could do it from the city. Being a PEDro rater is a really great way to improve my understanding of research and really sustain and build on how these papers apply to my patients. Being a PEDro rater has been a really rewarding way to contribute to the physiotherapy research profession.
Everyone has the potential to be a PEDro reviewer. I recommend all of my HDR students become involved as PEDro reviewers, and I've even had some undergraduate students get involved too.
All right, so yeah, that was our summary of the rating process. And yeah, Geraldine says she likes the quote saying everyone has the potential to be a PEDro reviewer. Yeah, so basically we wanted to just have the opportunity to have any further questions or discussion, or really to hear from you a bit more about, what might be useful, about reflections of, the use of PEDro in Africa.
I've got a question for Horon and Collier. Your physio students, do they get exposure to PEDro as undergraduates?
Yes, they do. In our curriculum, there's a lot of activities where they have to go and find articles, evidence for example, patient presentations that they are doing. And that's where we teach them, to kind of go and search all the databases and find high quality evidence. So, and they also do, they write a protocol undergrad as well, as part of their research module. So they definitely interact with PEDro from early on.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Yes, our students do have an interaction with PEDro. I think we're beginning to incorporate it in our curriculum, where it's part of research. They use it to review articles. They use it to even come up with various research, analysis on various things. So we have incorporated it in our curriculum, and yes, they're getting that exposure. Thank you.
And do you think when the students graduate and start their careers that they see PEDro as a resource to establish themselves? Like, this is a question to everybody. Because it'd be really nice if they can go out into their clinical environments and come home at night and have a question and just spend a little bit of time, instead of going onto Google, but going onto PEDro and finding what the evidence says about an issue they might have come across their day. But I just wonder whether we getting that message across to the new graduates.
I think part of the problem is often when new graduates start, they're so busy just managing the caseload, and they're just unfamiliar with managing the number of patients that they are then responsible for, that they don't really spend a lot of time keeping up with evidence. And then if 2 or 3 or 5 years later, when they've got things more under control and they've got more time, they've kind of maybe forgotten what they learned about that at university. And I think that we need to try and intervene in that that sort of lag to them getting back to being interested in evidence, and then not remembering how to access it all.
Possibly something like, I'm looking at Corlia, who's involved with the South African Physio Society, and me at the APA, how we need to prompt our members. One thing we're doing next year, Collier, is we're going to start a member app where all the physio APA members will have an opportunity to join an app. They'll be able to join their special interest group on the app. We'll be able to communicate with them and a bit more directly. outside of emails and unregulated sort of Facebook messaging. So we're hoping that will provide an avenue for that reminder mark, keeping those things alive a bit more, because people seem to get on the train and look at their apps, but they don't tend to look at other digital forms of communication as much as, say, we used to.
Yeah. Paulia, what were you going to say?
No, I was just thinking, on the first comment on do they go back and interact with PEDro? I do think, well, it's something that we are really seeing as well, and we are now obviously challenged with is AI. Students always will go the easiest and the quickest way. So it's kind of, now to navigate how they use AI, the reliability of it, and teaching them how to stick to high quality evidence, and make that decision on what is not good and what is good. And I do think, we must, and I agree, we should probably emphasize that quite a lot more. Where is the good sources that you can go to? I mean, it's very easy for them to, type into Google Scholar or whatever, and whatever it throws out, that's the first and the quickest thing that they just draw on. And again, I do think, it is, as Mark also said, they have high caseloads, a lot of work to do. And the student is a student, still. But yeah, I do think we also need to, with the challenges, we also need to make a conscious mind shift on how we speak to them and what we actually, the information that we share with them. Consciously, we should emphasize it much more. And then maybe from my side, I think it would be really good if we can have, for example, just different ways that if there's people interested in becoming involved in PEDro, volunteering, what are the possibilities? Where can they volunteer? How can they become involved? I think that would also be a great way of exposing them to it as well. So yeah, that would be very nice to have, if it's possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. In fact, we've been having those kind of discussions in the last couple of days about, can we kind of articulate sort of small tasks for different people kind of around the world to help. And so ways of kind of breaking it down so that it's not too overwhelming, but it's kind of, something that people can a way that people can contribute. So yeah, it sounds like there might be some interest in your part of the world in contributing in that way too.
I think it would be exciting if we could build AI into PEDro, because people just love the thought of AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've also had an idea about trying to have an AI kind of interface with PEDro, and also trying to use AI to actually help the process a bit more. So as Chris said when he was interviewed, that the task is getting harder all the time as the amount of evidence grows, and so we are keen to work out how we can use AI to kind of help make the production of PEDro more efficient. And so Geraldine had a bit of a question. I'll read it out for you with your sound not being great. So Geraldine was wondering, are there ways that PEDro could help support students or clinicians in Africa to use other types of the resources on PEDro? So, we've got the evidence feeds. Oh, fantastic. The web, the newsletters, knowing about opportunities. And Corley is answering, saying that a short webinar could be useful.
Do you think a pre-recorded webinar that you could distribute to many different countries?
Yeah, I just added, or a short video we can just show our students because they have specific courses, for example, where they do research methodology. And when we talk about evidence, that, for example, the lit review, we can show them these videos because I don't think they know about all the tools. I also personally even didn't know about all the tools until recently. So it's just a question of, again, we must just share the information with them, actually. That would be very useful, I think, from our side at least. Yeah.
And how long's short, Corlia? 20 minutes, 10 minutes?
Oh, any time you like. Anything, I think, between up to even 30 minutes, that could be fine. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yes. Yes, I also want to agree with Prof there that a video would quite be helpful. We do have a unit in our institution that we call evidence-based practice, where we go into and discuss with them about PEDro and how to use PEDro and how to review. So it would come in handy, such a video would come in handy if we could have and showcase them about how to just go around PEDro. Then the other thing I also want to say that you could help us with is probably offer those opportunities for the students to volunteer. We do teach them on how to rate different articles using the PEDro scale. So if we could have those opportunities where they could, interact with the PEDro guys, it will be in real sense. I think it would help kind of reinforce that use of PEDro even way after they have qualified and left the education. Thank you.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like both of you are involved with sort of teaching evidence-based practice. We also have a bit of a network here in Australia of people teaching evidence-based practice that they're sort of trying to get together and kind of share resources and things. And we were sort of thinking of trying to expand that internationally as well. So, perhaps, that might be something of use that, people actually teaching evidence-based practice can be trying to learn from each other all around the world and, sharing resources that they've developed. Right, so
I think, sorry, no, just to add on to that, so we teach it, but I think also from our society, we have a specific committee that looks into, specific evidence. As I said, specifically when we get queries from medical aids, we need to draw out the evidence, whether it's just a short statement or a comment or something. So I definitely think there's scope for that, something that we struggle or are challenged a lot with is that a lot of the evidence is actually not from Africa. So the contexts are not always applicable. So it would be nice to kind of, throw around ideas sometimes regarding that.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that came up in the when we had a session in the World Physio Conference in Dubai last year, or the year before. People wondered if we could have an extra field on PEDro that actually said, where the evidence was actually from. That would make it easier to, rapidly assess that. Because, obviously things are different in different contexts. Any further kind of comments, suggestions, questions? Fantastic. I've just got a few final slides, but please do feel free to get in touch, and let's try and kind of continue the keep the conversation going. I'll just go back to where we were, hopefully. Right. So we just, literally wanted to basically have a bit of an acknowledgement of all the people who've contributed to date. And so these are basically some of our sort of financial supporters since the beginning of PEDro. These are a list of our kind of current raters. information about our current collaborators. So these are all the people who've been involved in translating PEDro into the 17 languages. Here's some of the formal satellite centres that we've set up. Here's the people from that PEDro Champions group that I mentioned. That's sort of a network of people teaching evidence-based practice. And yeah, we've got various committees, the steering committee, the education and training, various working parties, advisors, staff. So Geraldine works part-time on PEDro, and then we've got a few other kind of casual staff that kind of contribute to it. So it really is very much on a shoestring. And yeah, we're really keen to kind of get more volunteer contributions. There's opportunities to do more research on PEDro, as Mark mentioned. Basically opportunities to sort of have more networks of people around the world learning from each other. As we've talked about, we're keen to explore the use of AI. We're also keen to look at applying for more grants for PEDro to, and perhaps with things like exploring AI and the tools and things. And also, yeah, really keen to get more volunteers, and also really keen for different suggestions. People, have different ideas about how we can do things better, and how we can be more efficient with keeping things going and doing more into the future. And we've also got the current Buy Us a Coffee campaign, where we're encouraging people to give a kind of small regular donation to PEDro. And that's just a summary of some of the highlights of PEDro. And then we've got a questionnaire there that we're just encouraging people to fill in to sort of with suggestions for how they might like to get involved. So yeah, that's pretty much all we wanted to say. So thank you so much for coming along, and yeah, great to have that time to have a little bit of discussion about what might be useful to take PEDro to the next stage in Africa. So yeah, we look forward to connecting with you more in future, and have a great day.
Same to you. Have a lovely day.
Thanks so much.
All right, pleasure. Bye-bye.